Have you ever asked yourself why trying to be a good person all the time feels so draining, so exhausting, as if every smile you force and every kind word you offer takes a piece of your energy with it? It's not just you. So many people live this invisible struggle where being good becomes less of a virtue and more of a requirement, a performance, a shield they wear every day to avoid judgment, rejection, or being misunderstood. From the earliest stages of life, we are told to behave, to be polite, to put others before ourselves. And so we grow up thinking that the more we ignore our needs, the more valuable we become. But no one warned us that in the process of becoming the person everyone admires, we might forget who we really are. You smile when you want to cry. You agree when your whole body screams no. You support others while silently begging for someone to support you. And the worst part? You've convinced yourself that this is what it means to be a good human. But deep down, something feels off. You sense that there's a price to this performance, a hidden cost no one talks about. Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers in history, warned us of this trap. He saw human behavior not as a series of noble choices, but as actions influenced by a deeper, raw force he called the will. A blind, self-serving energy that drives every creature to act, regardless of morality or social expectations. According to him, when we try to crush this will, under the weight of constant goodness, we don't purify ourselves. We fracture. We split into two versions, one that feels and one that performs. And over time, this split causes an inner suffering that no one else sees, because everyone is too busy praising how kind, patient, and giving you are. What appears as virtue on the outside may in fact be a desperate attempt to maintain an image, to stay accepted, to avoid the fear of not being enough. Schopenhauer didn't dismiss kindness altogether. He simply believed that when it's forced, it's not real. You start to give not from love, but from fear. You offer support not because you want to, but because you're terrified of what will happen if you don't. And slowly, resentment begins to take root. That quiet bitterness that builds each time your sacrifices go unnoticed, each time your silence is mistaken for agreement, each time you help others while feeling completely alone. This isn't just burnout. It's emotional depletion caused by living in opposition to your natural impulses. Schopenhauer believed that repressing the will doesn't make it disappear. It simply buries it deeper, where it waits, growing stronger in the shadows. You may think you're being noble by suppressing your anger, your desire, your jealousy. But often, you're just feeding a version of yourself that will later explode in unexpected ways. You start to lose your spontaneity, your joy, your authenticity, all for the sake of appearing morally clean. You wake up each day carrying invisible expectations: be kind, don't complain, don't make a scene, and in return, you hope for approval, affection, maybe even a little peace. But peace doesn't come when you're constantly denying your truth. Peace comes from being whole. And wholeness requires facing not just the pleasant parts of yourself, but the darker ones too. The more you pretend to be perfect, the more distant you become from your real self, and the lonelier it feels to exist. Schopenhauer saw this as the tragedy of moral idealism, that when we force ourselves to always act in ways that are socially praised, we're not becoming better people, we're just becoming better actors, and when the curtain falls, when you're finally alone, you're left with emptiness, a feeling that you've given everything and still feel invisible. This is the beginning of silent suffering, the kind that no one talks about because it wears the mask of goodness. But goodness that comes from fear, from pressure, from a desire to control how others see you, is not goodness. It's survival, it's self-protection, and it's unsustainable. You can't keep offering your time, energy, and emotions like currency, hoping they will buy you the love or safety you crave. At some point, you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of constantly being good? And are you willing to keep paying it with pieces of yourself? Schopenhauer didn't offer easy answers, but he pointed us towards something uncomfortable and freeing. Real change, real compassion, and real peace only begin when we stop pretending and start acknowledging the parts of ourselves we've tried so hard to hide. Because until you see the trap you're in, you will keep sacrificing your truth for the illusion of goodness and slowly forget what it means to be alive. There comes a point when this endless performance of kindness stops feeling noble and starts to feel like a slow erasure of your own identity. The more you live to serve, to please, to be available for others, the more you begin to lose touch with who you actually are beyond the roles you've learned to play. You become the person who nods in agreement even when you feel unseen, who carries burdens that were never yours, who says yes because saying no feels like betrayal. It's easy to think of this as generosity, but Schopenhauer would see something far more complex beneath the surface. He believed that when we suppress our will in the name of being good, we aren't becoming virtuous, we're becoming distant from our true selves. That constant self-sacrifice is not necessarily an act of strength, but often a symptom of emotional enslavement. You give and give, hoping that someone will notice, appreciate, understand. But most don't. And eventually you find yourself sitting in the quiet of your own exhaustion, wondering why the care you offer never seems to return in the same way. Society applauds this behavior. They call you strong, selfless, admirable, all while never realizing how much it hurts to be constantly needed and never truly seen. What they praise as moral strength, Schopenhauer viewed as a mask worn by a deeper, more selfish force, the will, that manipulates us through moral appearances. You think you're choosing virtue, but you're actually responding to internal compulsions you haven't yet understood. And the more you bend yourself to fit the image of the ideal person, the more fractured you become inside. You act with patience, not because you feel it, but because you fear what might happen if you speak your truth. You offer support, not from abundance, but from a place of guilt and obligation. And this imbalance creates a quiet storm inside, a conflict. It between the part of you that wants to please and the part of you that's slowly disappearing. The truth is, when kindness becomes an expectation rather than a choice, it loses its sincerity. You begin to live for approval, for validation, for a sense of safety in the eyes of others. And the terrifying thing is, you might not even realize it's happening. You believe you're being helpful, but deep down, you're waiting for someone to finally see how much you've given. When that recognition doesn't come, and it often doesn't, resentment builds like smoke in a closed room. You keep smiling, keep showing up, but your chest is full of unspoken frustration. This is the dark side of constant virtue, a side Schopenhauer understood with brutal clarity. He saw that we often pretend to be good to manage how others perceive us, not because the goodness is flowing naturally. It becomes a form of emotional currency. You do favors not just to give, but to build unspoken debts. You're quiet not out of peace, but to maintain your place, your acceptance. And in time, this turns you into someone who feels both used and unseen. You start to think, after everything I've done, why don't they appreciate me? But the truth is, no one asked you to carry all that. You chose to, perhaps unconsciously, hoping to be rewarded with love, respect, or security. That hope becomes a trap. You live to serve and feel bitter when the return doesn't match the investment. And because you've been so silent about your own needs, no one even realizes they exist. Schopenhauer pointed out that repressing the will never truly works. It just drives it deeper underground, where it expresses itself through passive-aggressive behavior, coldness, sarcasm, or emotional withdrawal. You may think you're being virtuous by never complaining, but your body tells another story. Through stress, fatigue, or illness, the cost of hiding your truth begins to show up in subtle yet devastating ways. Your laughter feels hollow, your joy feels distant. You become an actor in your own life, playing a role that feels heavier with each passing day. And no matter how much praise you receive, it never fills the emptiness inside, because applause can't replace authenticity, and praise won't make you feel seen if you're constantly hiding your real self. This is where Schopenhauer's insight cuts the deepest, his belief that true understanding begins only when we stop pretending to be above our human nature. That until we accept our contradictions, our impulses, and our desires, we cannot truly act with compassion. The more we try to escape our selfishness, the more it shapes our behavior from the shadows. And ironically, the less we try to be good just for appearances, the more space we make for genuine kindness to emerge. So ask yourself, how much of your goodness is truly voluntary? And how much of it is shaped by fear, fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of being misunderstood. If you're constantly giving in order to receive something in return, even if it's just emotional security, then that isn't generosity, it's negotiation, and it's exhausting. You weren't born to play a role. You weren't put on this earth just to be agreeable, self-sacrificing, and silent. You have a will, a force within you that demands to be heard, even if the world prefers your silence. The question is whether you will keep suppressing it in the name of being good, or whether you will learn to understand it, to live alongside it without shame. Because only then will you stop needing to be seen as good, and start learning what it actually means to be real. The problem with endlessly trying to be virtuous is that it creates a double life, one that looks admirable on the outside but quietly unravels within. When you live in self-denial, constantly silencing your own needs to protect an image of goodness, you don't just deceive others, you abandon yourself. And this slow abandonment often gives rise to something corrosive, resentment. The more you serve without being seen, the more invisible you start to feel. You give your time, your energy, your empathy, hoping for appreciation, a sign that someone notices your efforts, but more often than not, that recognition never comes. And instead of feeling fulfilled, you begin to feel exploited. You've built a life around pleasing others, only to discover that no one was keeping score but you. Schopenhauer understood this painful cycle. He saw how the will, this blind force within us that seeks to satisfy itself, often hides behind moral behavior. We don't act kindly just for the sake of it. We act with an unspoken expectation that our sacrifice will buy us love, approval, or protection. But when that return doesn't come, we're left with bitterness we don't know how to express. And here lies the tragedy. Even when you try to help others, it can become a way of controlling how they see you, keeping their love close or their rejection at bay. Virtue becomes a strategy, not a truth. And in that strategy, you forget what it means to choose goodness freely. Over time, you start to measure every interaction. Was I kind enough? Did I seem agreeable? Did I do enough to prove I'm worth keeping around? And the more you ask these questions, the further you drift from sincerity. What once looked like compassion becomes a subtle manipulation, a transaction where you give only to avoid being left behind. Schopenhauer warned us that this kind of moral effort isn't virtue at all, it's performance. And when morality becomes theater, its soul dies. Because genuine compassion can't be forced. It doesn't thrive under pressure. It doesn't emerge from guilt or duty or fear of rejection. It rises naturally like breath when we stop pretending. And that's the freedom most people never taste, acting from authenticity, not obligation. But to get there, we have to face something uncomfortable. We are not purely selfless. We are driven by needs we rarely admit, needs for validation, safety, attention, love. And if we keep denying those needs, they begin to twist our actions, disguising self-interest as selflessness. That's why Schopenhauer believed the path to true compassion doesn't begin with denying who we are, but by accepting it completely, even the parts we've been taught to hide. It's only when you acknowledge your own selfish impulses without shame that you stop using kindness as a way to manipulate outcomes. You no longer need to seem perfect. You don't have to wear masks to be accepted. And in that raw honesty, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel for others, not because you're supposed to, but because you finally understand that their suffering is no different from your own. Their struggles mirror yours. Their pain is part of the same human condition you've spent your life trying to navigate. This is the compassion Schopenhauer described, not a polished moral ideal, but a visceral recognition that beneath all the roles we play, all the efforts to appear good, we are all the same, wounded, yearning, and trying to matter. In that space, you can stop overperforming. You can stop chasing approval through virtue. You can show up as you are, flawed but honest. You can say no without guilt. You can offer help without expecting anything in return. And most importantly, you can finally allow yourself to receive without feeling weak or selfish. Imagine how different life would feel if you didn't have to maintain the illusion anymore. No more hiding your frustration behind polite smiles. No more swallowing your sadness just to appear strong. No more living in fear that one misstep will ruin the identity you've worked so hard to maintain. You could breathe again. You could exist without explanation. Because real freedom isn't about being seen as good, it's about living in a way that feels true. And once you stop trying to be perfect, you begin to notice that everyone else is struggling too. No one is immune to contradiction. No one is without needs. And that shared imperfection is what makes empathy possible. You stop judging others by how well they perform goodness. You start seeing people, really seeing them, beyond their roles, beyond their mistakes. Schopenhauer's message was not a call to abandon virtue, but to purify it. To peel away the false layers until what remains is something real. He wasn't asking us to become selfish, he was asking us to become honest, because only in that honesty does real kindness arise, not because it's expected, but because it becomes impossible not to care. When you see your pain reflected in someone else, you don't have to try to be compassionate, it just happens. Like light spilling from a window. It's no longer about being the good person, it's about being a whole person, someone who can feel, fail, forgive, and begin again. So if you've spent your life trying to be perfect, maybe it's time to put that burden down. Maybe it's time to stop measuring your worth by how much you please others. Maybe, just maybe, the most generous thing you can do for the world is to start being real. With yourself first, and then with everyone else. Because when you stop needing to appear kind, you create space for true kindness to finally breathe. If this message spoke to something buried deep within you, you're not alone. And you don't have to keep pretending. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today. If this journey toward truth and inner freedom matters to you, don't forget to subscribe and watch the next video, because real healing begins when we stop running from who we are and finally choose to understand it.